Good morning, everybody. My name is Lynn Houmdi, and I'm the co-creator of Making Work Work and also the founder of Flexible Working Scotland. And I'm here today with my colleague Leslie Morris, who works in the team at the Challenges Group, which delivers Making Work Work. So welcome to you all. I think we've probably got a combination of women who have or are participating in Making Work Work programs of various types and members of Flexible Working Scotland. So if you are able to access the chat and you want to just say hello and say where you're calling from, you're very welcome to do that. Just a couple of words before we get started. So we've developed this series of short webinars in collaboration between Making Work Work and Flexible Working Scotland as a means to reach more women who are perhaps ineligible for the funded Making Work Work programs, and also just to spread the word. So we hope that you find it useful. For those of you who don't know, Making Work Work is a suite of award-winning programs that helps women to access a meaningful work following a career break. And the programs are hosted by the Challenges Group, which is a group of social businesses. We're based in Edinburgh, and we also have offices in a number of African countries. But Making Work Work is run in Scotland. At present, we're supporting women on the main Making Work Work programme in Edinburgh and Midlothian. We are also running a programme called LEAP, which stands for Learning, Employability and Purpose. That's also based in Edinburgh and it's underway. It's a pilot with our colleagues at First Port, and it supports women to do a pro bono placement in a social enterprise while receiving training on a number of issues. And we also train the host social enterprises in good management and leadership practice. And we've got at least one woman here who's on our programme Ready to Rise, which is also run in collaboration with First Port, and that's for women across Scotland who are at the pre-startup stage of a social business. So welcome to you all. And many of you will already be aware of the Flexible Working Scotland group, which I founded in April 2021. So just after we started with the Making Work Work pilot. And that's now a community of over 13,000 people, which is remarkable, across Scotland, looking to work flexibly, recruit flexibly, and advocate for greater flexibility and equality in the workplace. Okay, so without further ado, today we are going to cover 5 main areas. So what is flexible working and how to flex? What the benefits are of flexible working, not just to yourselves as potential candidates or employees, but also for employers. I'll talk about your rights, including the new legislation that is coming in at the start of April. We'll cover when and how to ask for flexible working. That's probably one of the questions that comes up the most often on Making Work Work and in Flexible Working Scotland. And I'll talk a little bit about where to find flexible jobs and where you can get some more help. And as I say, you're welcome to ask questions at the end. We've scheduled this for an hour, so we might not cover everything if you have a lot of questions. But if you have further questions, you're welcome, if you're on one of our programs, to post in the Teams channels, or if you're a member of Flexible Working Scotland, you can post there, and then you'll get advice not just from me, but not from 13,000 other people, but from a number of them. And it is possible to post anonymously in Flexible Working Scotland if you have concerns around that. So first up, what do we mean by flexible working? So personally, because of the kinds of client groups that I work with, which are mainly women and mainly women who have had career breaks, and largely but not exclusively women who are mums, I define flexible working for the purposes of flexible working in Scotland as any deviation in terms of the time or location from the norm. I've put norm in inverted commas because I'm not sure that there is a norm, or the norm is gradually being eroded. So from that norm of a 9 to 5, Monday to Friday job in a location which is set by the employer. And for me, that includes part-time work. Now, part-time work might not always be that flexible. Part-time hours may be very fixed. But if that's what works for you, and if that's the deviation from the norm that you need, then, and that's all the flexibility you need, then, I think we can include that in the umbrella. So really, flexible working is about what offers you the flexibility you need in your work-life blend. I don't talk about work-life balance or I try not to, because for me that conjures up this image of a set of scales. And so if life's on the rise, then work's on the fall, or vice versa. So on Making Work programs, we talk about work-life blend. So how do you create a holistic blend of all the things that are important to you in your life, and how does work fit into that? And I know that my colleagues touched on that a bit in the previous webinar. So just to give you an idea of some of the ways that people work flexibly in Scotland, these are results from a survey conducted by our friends at Flexibility Works, which is an organisation that supports businesses to work more flexibly. So they're much less about the candidates and more about helping businesses implement flexible working, although they will help candidates. And so their survey says that the most popular flexible working option is some home working. So that might be a formalised hybrid working arrangement. It might be that somebody's able to do a few hours from home if they have to leave the office early, for example, to pick up kids, or it might be a very formalised, you need to be in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and the rest you can do from home. So there's lots of variations on that theme, but some degree of home working is what, now I need to take my glasses off, 50% of workers reported being able to do. And then the next one there is flexible start and finish time. So sometimes that's known as flexi time. And then you can see there are different variations there: informal or ad hoc changes, part-time hybrid, full-time remote, shift swapping, compressed hours, and so on and so forth. And I think it's worth saying at this point that often when we think of flexible working, particularly hybrid, we are thinking of an office-based context or, a kind of knowledge economy context. But although it may be harder to implement flexibility in some of those sort of frontline roles or roles that are very dependent on being in a particular location, such as health and social care, retail, hospitality, manufacturing, and so on, it is possible, and often people welcome a bit of autonomy or a bit of a say in how rotas are arranged, how they're able to maybe swap with colleagues, and often that's enough. I think, it's only a small minority of people who actually want to sit with a laptop on a beach in Southeast Asia. And most people just want a little bit of autonomy and to be able to plan around their work and the other things that are important to them. So when we're talking about, I've put again in inverted commas, non-standard, but I think these are all kind of variations along the spectrum. We're thinking about when we work. So that might be chunks of time, it might be days of the week, it might be hours in a day, where we work, so the location from which we work. And there's also something to think about in terms of how we work. And so how might include job shares, it might be contractual arrangements such as 0 hours contracts, which do get a bad name, but sometimes they might be perfect. I'm thinking of perhaps students who are free during the peak times of businesses they might be working for, such as in hospitality. And it works for both sides. There's a bit less work in term time and a bit more work in the holidays. People might use leave arrangements to get a bit of flexibility. Some people might have total flexibility. I've seen that, I would say, more commonly in for self-employed people, but there will be some businesses out there that offer the flexibility to get stuff done whenever and wherever it suits. For some people, a time-limited contract might be perfect. They might just go at a job for, 6 weeks and then have a bit of a break. And obviously, self-employment is an option and will be one that many of you are considering. So coming on to the benefits of flexible working, I've just included this headline from the Times last week, about 11 days ago. Some research is coming to light now, which is underpinning what we have observed on Making Work Work for quite some time, which is that working from home and by extension other forms of flexible working not only are getting women into the workplace, which is what we see on Making Work Work, but they're keeping women in employment, and they are also enabling women to progress. Because the fact of the matter is that the commitments that women might have outside of work, be that family, be it health, be it having family somewhere else in the world, whatever it might be, they don't go away when women go back to work, and women still need to be managing those. So for many women, and I think for about 20% of the Scottish workforce overall, without flexibility, they cannot work at all. So the headlines like this are no surprise to me, but apparently they are news and newsworthy. So flexible working is absolutely fundamental to ensure that workplaces are diverse and that women can re-enter the workplace after a career break and progress and start impacting senior leadership and the gender pay gap. So there are many benefits to employees of flexible working, such as being able to fit work around other commitments, having a better work-life balance, which means less stress, less illness, less burnout. It might enable people to manage disabilities or health issues or energy levels better, or to work into, I've put retirement in inverted commas because the retirement age is about to disappear. Flexible working can contribute to a culture where staff feel valued, and that has been proven to support better staff well-being. It can reduce the cost of the commute and the environmental impact if that's something that is of concern to you. It can help you keep your hand in. So as I said, for some women, without flex, they can't work at all. So for women going back from maternity leave or from a period recovering from an illness, being able to go back part-time or on a phased return in a flexible way enables them to return to work at all. And as I said, there's some research that's come out recently that suggesting that organisations that promote flexible working and promote flexible working into senior leadership roles are facilitating women to progress and kind of getting over this idea that you need to be always on and always available in order to get a senior role, which is what Professor Claudia Goldin observed and got the Nobel Prize for Economics for last year. So there's increasing recognition of these issues. So, but we're probably all thinking about how flexible working would benefit us, but there is also evidence that suggests it's beneficial to employers. So by offering staff autonomy over their hours, employers can build trust, and that increases productivity and engagement by staff. Again, our friends at Flexibility Works found that almost half of Scottish employers surveyed thought flexible working had improved employee productivity, and almost 70% thought the economy was better off for flexible working. And I saw an interesting study this morning by Nick Bloom, who suggested that flexible working is driving economic growth because women are able to offer their labour. So those government ministers at Westminster and those businesses who are saying working from home is shirking from home, and everybody needs to be back in the office to drive productivity, they're barking up the wrong tree. Women are increasingly able to access work at all because of flexibility. Flexible working promotes a healthy work-life balance or blend, reducing stress and burnout, which means fewer sick days and greater retention. Staff who feel valued have greater job satisfaction, and so will be willing to go the extra mile when it's needed. And they'll talk about their employer. They'll tell their friends to join a flexible employer. Flexibility can give employers the wriggle room to deploy resources when they need them. As I mentioned, for example, more staff at peak hours or peak times in the year. I'm thinking of tourism in Scotland. There's a massive influx of workers to the tourism sector at this time of year and through the peak season in the summer. McKinsey have found that more diverse leadership teams drive diversity of thinking and profitability and impact. And flexible working is a major enabler of diversity, not just for women, but for diversity of all kinds. Neurodivergent people may appreciate flexible working or some time to work from home where it's maybe a bit quieter, or there may be other things going on that they prefer, to work flexibly. Disabled people, particularly physically disabled people, can greatly benefit from working remotely. And there's been studies in the US that suggest Black and minority ethnic workers prefer to work some time from home because of microaggressions or dominant cultures at work that they do not feel are particularly supportive. There are recruitment benefits to flexible working. It means that employers can recruit from a wider pool of both skills and location if they're not dependent on people being within commuting distance. Then they can recruit much more broadly. And we see this a lot in the tech sector. There's a lot of very highly skilled tech jobs that are basically recruited pretty much worldwide now. And it contributes to employer brand. If people are happy at work, they will talk about their employer. And if people are looking for flexible working, they will go and look on employer websites and find out the companies where they're going to thrive. A study by TimeWise, who are a consultancy working in this kind of area in 2022, found that 93% of unemployed people want some degree of flexibility. And there are big recruitment challenges at the moment. So if employers want to access some of those unemployed people, then it is a good reason to offer flexibility. And there's also statistics around people wanting to move in order to gain flexibility or more flexibility. So it can really drive recruitment. And finally, the environmental benefits. Despite what UK government ministers might be saying, a lot of organisations and employers are actually divesting from office space and footprint in city centres because it's cost efficient. It depends on their model. It depends on who owns the building. But a lot of charities as well are giving up offices because it's cheaper, but also there are environmental benefits of not heating and lighting offices that nobody's in. So your rights as regards flexible working. So the law is changing. Those of you who are members of Flexible Working Scotland may be aware of that. I have to say awareness among employers is not great, but I think that's normal with changes to legislation. It often takes a bit of time for people to catch up. But essentially, from the start of the new financial year, flexible working will be available from day one. So instead of the previous system where employees had to be working 26 weeks with an employer before they could ask, which really meant that it was only women coming back from mat leave who were asking for flexible working. It will be possible to ask from day one. And practically speaking, that's going to push the conversation into the recruitment period. And that's going to make a big difference because I think in the past, employers were willing to offer flexibility as a kind of benefit or a favour to employees, but it was harder for people to be recruited on the basis of flexibility. And that is definitely changing. It's changing because of the pandemic, and it will change further, I think, because of this legislation. So employees will be able to submit 2 requests a year. It was 1 previously. So that means, if you have a life event or perhaps an issue around childcare, you can submit a request to deal with a certain period, and then you could submit another request again. Employees will no longer need to explain the effect of the flexible working request. The onus will be on the business to figure out if it could work. My advice would be still prepare yourself for, with a business case, because you want to make it easy for them to say yes. Employers are now going to need to consult with the requester before making a decision if the decision is potentially going to be no. So there needs to be a dialogue and more of a negotiation and a discussion. So I think over time that will make it harder for employers to just issue a flat no, and they won't be able to kind of rely on these slightly spurious business reasons that were under the previous legislation. Employers will need to respond more quickly. I mean, still not that quick, but it's 2 months instead of 3. And I think in terms of life events, stuff happens. People get ill, people divorce, people, all kinds of things happen. And so the fact that that needs to be turned around a bit quicker is going to make things a bit less stressful, I think. But it will take time to shape and put into practice in organisations. And I think for anybody who's job searching at the moment, you can take confidence from the fact that the law is changing, and you can perhaps gently challenge some practices if you think that people are offering you jobs that are not compliant with the new legislation. And for businesses, there's lots of information out there. There's information on the gov.uk website. There's information on the Flexibility Works website. They're running events, and there's information on the ACAS website. And so if you are in the situation where you're having to formally request flexible working, and there are many, many employers out there who have flexible working practices that go above and beyond the legislation, where perhaps you make an arrangement with the recruiting manager or your line manager, and you don't need to issue a formal statutory-based request. But if you are in this situation, you might find it useful to read some of the guidance that employers are going to be reading. So the big question, when to ask? I would say, first of all, do a bit of research. If flexibility is important to you, and it's potentially the, oh my goodness, I've lost the word. If it's the one thing that's going to be a deciding factor from you in whether you take a job or you don't take a job, then you want to be forearmed with as much information you can get about that organisation's attitude and approach and culture and flexible working policies. So I would say find out if the door is open, check the job ad, do some research on LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Fishbowl, which is a bit like Glassdoor. Call and ask somebody, ask the person at the bottom of the job ad, find somebody on LinkedIn who works there. Go on Flexible Working Scotland and ask if anybody works there. Find out if the door is even open, because if it isn't, and flexible working is absolutely essential to you, then don't waste your time. I think the previous advice before the pandemic was often get to the end of the recruitment process and they'll love you so much they'll agree to what you want. I don't think that's necessary anymore because there are a lot more flexible jobs out there. As I'll talk about slightly later, they're not always advertised as such, but there are so many more flexible jobs out there. I don't think you need to waste your time going through a whole application and recruitment process only to be told at the end, oh, no, we don't do flexible working. Now, that will change with the legislation because employers will have to comply, but there will always be some laggards. Be prepared to make a business case. You know, if you see a job ad and it says that I quite often see this open to full-time or part-time hours. Think about how everything on the job description is going to get done if you ask for part-time hours. You make it easy for them to say yes. The example I always give is if the job involves dealing with clients in the US, it's unlikely that an employer will allow you only to work in the mornings because your clients are not going to be awake. But if you can say, well, I'll get all my admin done in the mornings and I'll deal with the clients when it's the evening in the UK, so it's the afternoon for the clients, bingo. So think about how the job can get done. You may have to negotiate, so know what your bottom line is, know where your boundaries are. Think about what you'd ideally like. You know, maybe ideally you'd like to do 4 days a week. If they offered you a 9-day fortnight, would that be a deal breaker? So think about the different ways you could achieve your objective. If your objective might be being able to pick the kids up 2 out of 5 days a week or whatever it might be, and know where your wiggle room is. You do not want to be in an interview or in a contractual negotiation where somebody offers you something you think, oh, I don't really want to say no, so I'll say yes. And then you're a few weeks into the job and it's just really stressful and you can't make it work. So try and have as much information and have thought this through as you can. Remember, a job's unfortunately not for life anymore, although I have to say some of the jobs for life are probably the most flexible, the ones in the public sector. But life changes. You know, right now you might have very young children, you might be very limited in the childcare you can access and therefore limited in the work you can do. But your kids will grow up. You know, you might, right now, your parents might be healthy. That might not always be the case. So it's quite hard to plan for the long term. So think about, again, what's important to you. If it's important for you to have a job that will flex with you, then go for those employers. If you're happy to do a job for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then see where you get to, that's fine as well. It's all very personal. Oh, my slide's slightly, my little symbol here is hiding the end of my next point, but you can always line up a question for the end of an interview to ask in generic terms about what their flexible working policy is. You know, that often an interviewer will say, have you got any questions for us? And you can ask. You don't need to commit at that point because they've not offered you a job, but you can ask at that point. And as I said, there is more info for employers and employees on the ACAS website. So this is just a little graphic here from me about unicorns and dinosaurs. I think what we are seeing now, this is my very personal take on it, but you know, I read a lot about flexible working and I see a lot of your questions and comments in Flexible Working Scotland. Change is always slow and it's never linear. So I think what we are seeing now in the press, with a lot of calls to get everybody back to the office, mandating days when people need to be in the office, big entrepreneurs like Alan Sugar and James Dyson and Charlie Mullin talking about shirking from home. I think those are the dying roars of the dinosaurs, if I'm honest, because some people will resist change. It suits them to resist change. My own analysis for the reasons behind people getting called back into the office would be, first of all, a lack of management experience and training. Now, I'm not saying for a minute that somebody who's run a company for decades doesn't have management experience, but what the Chartered Management Institute have found is that 82% of managers are promoted to managerial positions without any training. Now, if you're finding it challenging as a manager to manage the people you can see in front of you, you're going to find it really hard to manage them when you can't see them and you don't know what days they're coming in, and you haven't really got a toolkit for knowing what days they're coming in and who's doing what, when and where and how and with whom. So I think there's been a big lapse in adequate management training in the last few years. I think also there's a bit of ego in there. I think that's my personal take on these high-profile entrepreneurs, most of whom sit in the House of Lords, who are shouting about this. And I think the other aspect is that there has been a bit of complacency, particularly on the part of large businesses, that culture just happens. Well, in the past, before the pandemic, it probably just happened because people were sitting together and they avoided the people they didn't like and they made little cliques with the people they got along with. Now, to me, that's not organizational culture. To me, organizational culture needs to be inclusive and it needs to be actively generated and promoted and cultivated. And frankly, I think some organizations are finding that really hard to do when everybody's not all in the same place at the same time. And I think that has led to a situation of proximity bias, where if the boss can't see you, you don't get the promotion. And also palming off typically women who work part-time with the kind of jobs that are not that important. And that is changing. And I would say you are not looking for a unicorn if you are looking for flexibility, if you're looking for quite a small job in terms of hours, if you're looking for a job that's going to allow you to work from home for some or all of your time. You are definitely not looking for a unicorn. Those jobs are out there, but I don't think it's easy to find those jobs in the ways that we've always found jobs. So I don't think recruitment companies or recruitment agencies are particularly good at that. Some are differentiating themselves, but a recruitment agency's income is dependent on commission from a full-time salary. So it's in their interests to maximize the salary and maximize the hours. Also, I think that the big jobs websites like Indeed or S1 Jobs, they are not particularly good at this because they're just allowing employers to post jobs. So Indeed's quite good in that it typically asks employers to post the salary, which is great. Salary and transparency is really important. But if you're looking for something which is still not quite in the sort of box of the norm, and bear in mind the norm is changing, I don't think you'll find it in the normal place. So that means you need to be networking, means you need to be looking at specific flexible working jobs boards. It means you need to be doing some research into the kinds of organisations where you are going to thrive if flexible working is that important to you. And I'll come back to that before we finish. So more Scottish people are working back in the office now than ever since the pandemic. And apparently, according to this article in Fortune from the autumn last year, more people are working 5 days a week in the office than they were than they have been since the start of 2020. I can hazard a guess at what those people look like. And this is where this whole issue is really gendered. I think, and I can also hazard a guess at the kinds of organisations that are having people back in the office 5 days a week. But guess what? I read this morning on LinkedIn that there has been a rise in the long lunch. So restaurants in the City of London are booming because people are back in the office having lunches. Well, I can get so much done while some executive's having his lunch in some swanky office and charging it to his client if I'm working from home. So I think we need to be very careful about these kinds of headlines because they are probably not speaking about the people who are on this call. And the reality is actually very differentiated. You'll get these slides after today, so I won't go into any detail. But here we've got SCVO in the third sector. So they are the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations, so the umbrella body for charity and voluntary sector organisations in Scotland. I actually can't read that with my glasses on, but you may be able to on your screen and you can read it afterwards. We have the WISE Group who've won awards for their flexible working. They are a social enterprise and they talk about remote first. We have SSE, the energy company. They have a policy called flexible first, so big energy company in the private sector. And then we have the Scottish Government there in the public sector. So all three sectors, they're all, Scottish Government obviously is a huge employer. Big and small employers there. Really, I lifted this from all of their websites. So they're really going the extra mile to show candidates that they offer flexibility. So flexibility is important for you. Track down those sorts of employers. You can also use award schemes to find out who's got a good reputation for flexibility. So back in 2022, Flexibility Works held their most recent Flexible Employers Awards. Since then, they have been sponsoring a category in the Herald's Top Employers Awards. So here you have two lists, there might be some surprises in there, of employers who are award-winning for their flexibility. We've got SCVO and the WISE Group there, but others, Scottish Water, one of our Making Work alumni, has just started working for them. Arnold Clark, that was the surprise for me, but there you go. So lots of different employers who are offering flexibility, so do some research. Other places you can find flexible jobs. So if you aren't already, we can put the link to the chat in the chat for Flexible Work in Scotland. If you're not already a member, that's a way to find jobs. You can post jobs there. You might see a flexible job that's not really for you, but it might be for somebody else. You can ask questions, seek support. You can provide support. It's a great community. I'm so impressed by the support that people offer others. I post intel on the sort of latest state of the art of flexible working, and also if there's campaigns going on, I post about those. Some of us went through for the March of the Mummies in Glasgow in 2022, which was a Pregnant Then Screwed campaign. We've been doing a bit of awareness raising and campaigning around childcare provision in Edinburgh in the group. So if that's something you're interested in, the group is there for that as well. I have also produced a guide to flexible work in Scotland, which you can download from Ko-fi. I think I've set the minimum price at £5. If you're a Making Work participant or alumni, you get that free of charge. And that's really a list of the more agile and innovative jobs boards. For example, there's Flexible Working People, there is Investing in Women, they're two of the top ones. They are both UK wide, and that's partly why I set up Flexible Working Scotland, because they tend to be a bit Southeast England centric. But there's also lists of other jobs boards and vacancy websites and employers in that guide. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. If you've got your phone handy, please do take a picture of the QR code. We'd really like your feedback on today's session. Leslie's also going to put the link in the chat. Actually, Leslie, has the link changed? Because I know you were working on this in the background.
The link has changed, so disregard the QR code, and I will pop a link in the chat shortly, and I'll follow it up in an email.
Thanks, Leslie. I know Leslie was beavering away in the background, just updating that survey. So do
and
ignore that.
I'll stop recording just now as well, Lynn.
Okay. I'll just finish a couple more sentences.
No worries.
If you want more information on Making Work Work, our website is there. You can contact Leslie and the team. She can maybe put that email address in the chat as well. We are running some more of these webinars. Now let's see, I can't read that, so let me see if I can remember them. We've got one on CVs and applications. We've got a panel discussion with flexible employers, and we have also got some content around job searching and how to narrow down your search, because what we find often is it's not a lack of options, but it's an overwhelm of options that is holding women back. So you can book those. If you're a member of Flexible Working Scotland, there are Facebook events in the group, or you can book those directly on the Making Work website.